This is Tiffany Rosier, the host of the Afros and Knives podcast. We use the Anchor podcasting app to create and distribute the show. Creating a podcast on Anchor is effortless. It allows you to record a high-quality podcast and distribute it everywhere, including Google Podcast and Apple Podcast. They distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. No fancy equipment or podcasting experience is necessary, and it's 100% free. As long as you have a story to tell, Anchor is the platform to use. Share your story through audio using the Anchor app for Android, iPhone, or your desktop. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Welcome back to the Afros and Knives podcast, the interview series that elevates Black women's profiles and stories working in food and beverage, hospitality, food justice, food science, and food media. I am your host, Tiffany Rosier, and for this week's doubleheader, my next conversation is with Auzerais Bellamy. She's the owner of Blondery in New York, and she has served as a pastry sous-chef at Bouchon Bakery. She has been the executive pastry chef at Pies and Thighs. She has done staging time at Per Se, French Laundry, and Danielle. And in 2016, she launched her online business due to the overwhelming demand for her very flawless caramel and pecan blondies, or pecan, depending on what part of the country you're from. So for nearly 3 years, she has been shipping blondies nationwide, and her business just continues to grow. She still has the same high demand because her standards have never changed. She still is hitting all the right notes in her quality and in her presentation. So these are blondies you will definitely want to get your hands on. She relaunches again in, I want to say November. And for orders again, she's back on November 1st. So be sure to get on the waiting list. You want to head over to blondery.com and get on the waiting list. During our conversation, you will hear some talk about biscuits coming back. So you definitely want to get on the waiting list. And these are definitely going on the gift guide for this year. So I loved my conversation with her. We had a really great time chatting, and we dug into her family and how, the women in her family have influenced her and her entrepreneurship. So definitely excited for you guys to hear this conversation. A shout out again to our patrons, and be sure to hit up the Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Afros and Knives. And you know what to do if you love this podcast. Be sure to follow, subscribe, share, and comment. And now here is my conversation with Auzerais.
Nationwide. I was the sous chef at Thomas Keller's Bouchon Bakery for 3.5 years. I've staged at French Laundry, Per Se, and Danielle before starting Blondery. I grew up in Hayward, California, which is in the Bay Area. I currently live in Brooklyn. I've been here for about 5 years, and I'm super happy to be here today.
Okay, so you say the Bay Area because I lived in San Francisco. Wow, like 2001, maybe
Okay.
2002, and I mean, I loved it. It was beautiful, but it was very expensive. And so
Mm.
I was
You don't
like,
feel like New York is expensive?
not by, you know what? Not by comparison. Like all my rents have been pretty reasonable for New York,
Mm.
and honestly, living in Nashville was probably the most expensive city I've lived in.
Wow, that
Yeah,
shocks me.
look, the cost of living in Nashville is no joke. I don't understand it, but here we are. But talk to me a little bit about your path to like the French Laundry and into like the Thomas Keller universe.
Yeah, so I started baking when I was around 8 years old, mostly from the box. My dad would buy me all these box mixes, and I would create as much as I could. But I started to feel kind of limited in what I could create because I wasn't creating original recipes, right? So I grew up in a family of restaurateurs and entrepreneurs and chefs, but none of us had been to culinary school. So I decided I'm going to go to culinary school and I'm going to learn how to bake professionally. And I wanted to be the best so I could open my own bakery one day. So I went to Johnson and Wells, graduated in 2012, magna cum laude. My parents would be remiss if I didn't mention that part. Um, and I ended up landing a job at Bouchon. I didn't know anything about Bouchon, though, I should mention. Like, I just knew it was supposedly the best place to work.
You know what? My first restaurant job was a lot like that. I had gone to culinary school. I went to Le Cordon Bleu, and I applied for. I didn't even apply for the job. I put my resume up on the internet at some
Oh,
point,
wow.
and somebody from the Fat Radish here in New York had reached out
Yes.
to me, like through email, and because I was so green, I didn't know that that's not how you're supposed to get a job in a restaurant. So I completely understand. Like I didn't know anything about none of this. Walking in, I
Wait,
just knew I wanted to cook.
how are you supposed to get a job at a restaurant?
I guess, I mean, according to most of the people I that had been working in the field that I had started to meet and talk with, and when I explained my first job, they were like, "Wait a minute." They're like, "No, most people, you gotta like, you find out that the place is hiring, you go into the restaurant, you apply, and then they call you back for a stage, and then you come back." And I was like, "I didn't have to do any of that."
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that is kind
Okay.
of strange they didn't have you stage at least.
Yeah, I didn't have to. I actually did my interview via Skype. So
And that was pre COVID, so
that was
that's even
pre
more interesting.
anyway. But you mentioned that your family was a family of like restaurateurs and cooks and chefs and
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, and so like what and how and where.
Yeah, so my grandmother started a restaurant. I always get the timeline mixed up. I think it's around 47 years now. Um, and we still have locations today. It's called Everett Jones Bakery. I mean, sorry, that's me. It's called Everett Jones Barbecue. They're not a bakery. And yeah, my family ran the restaurant. So my grandmother had 9 children, 8 girls, 1 boy, and a whole bunch of grandchildren. So we all worked in the restaurant.
Now, see, I had to go directly to the website and Google the whole thing.
Yes.
So I was like, hold on, wait a minute.
Yes.
So, what did you learn from them about running a food business since your path essentially took you there?
It's hard work. It's very. My mom reminds me like you're doing the thing I was trying to run away from, and I'm like, well, I mean, this is where I grew up. I grew up around food. I grew up around family, around music and black culture. So um, that's kind of like it's just natural to me. I wanted to go into this. But I learned about how food can bring people together, especially good food, you know?
Absolutely. Now I can see here it says that you have what, 8 aunties and one.
8 very strong-minded Black women.
It sounds like. What is something that you learned from them about being a Black woman moving in the world?
That is such a good question because I think they all had such different personalities, and I learned something different from each one, and I feel so blessed. Like I think about that all the time, like the different personalities they had. And my auntie Angie was like the life of the party. She was the youngest, so she was just like out there in the world, like just doing her own thing. My auntie Katie taught me how to be a lady. She was like very girly, very prissy, as you would say. And we went and got our nails done. We went to the mall, and we would be at the mall for hours. And this was when I was like 16, 17. So it was such a great fit, like for us to be doing that together. And then my auntie May is like my auntie May. She is like the real like entrepreneur, like I can't even, I don't want to tell all her business, but like she how she handles her money.
Don't get me in trouble with your aunt.
How she handles her money is just like remarkable, right? And then like my mother was the educational, like she's the only one who went to college and graduated, so she's that one. And then my auntie Genya was the oldest, and she was the spiritual one. And like they all have such different personalities, and I think they just all taught me that I can have different dynamics to being a Black woman. I can be all of these things.
That's so good. That is so good, because it's definitely, I feel like it's one of the bigger challenges about not just being black, but being a Black woman, is that people paint you as a one-dimensional figure. And we understand, and they don't understand that there's so many, there's oceans in us. There's just so much there. And when you underestimate us, that's usually when you get in a little bit of trouble.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So it looks like it says that your family kind of started in Cleveland or Alabama and then found their way to Oakland. So how did that migration happen?
Yeah, so my grandfather is from New York, I believe, like upstate New York, Albany. I'm sorry, he's not from there. He moved there after California. They're both from Alabama, my grandfather and my grandmother. And I was so fortunate 2 years ago to be able to go visit the town, or I don't even know if that's what you would call it. It's like County Road 7 in Alabama. And I saw why, if my grandmother had the same entrepreneurial spirit, I saw why she would have left that place and wanted to leave. I believe she had 2 kids or 3 kids at the time. And there's nothing there. Like it's, like I said, County Road 11, there's a church, there's a graveyard. All of the houses are like trailer homes. They're like really advanced trailer homes. It looks like a house when you walk into it, but lots of land. And I think if she was anything like me, then she was looking for a bigger and better life for her kids.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. It's just like, okay, I need to occupy a bigger space, which literally means sometimes geographically finding a bigger space.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. I was like looking at, and I whoever wrote the bio or the story information on your grandparents' website for the restaurant, it did a beautiful job. So shout out to them.
Probably my auntie Shirley.
Okay, Auntie Shirley.
She's the aunt historian. Like she's the historian of the group. We have a whole Facebook group of everything. Like I love it. Love it.
It reads so beautifully. It's like real. She captures some real like hardcore storytelling. It's the kind of storytelling I love because it's almost like built into Black people.
Yeah.
But there's a point where it says that your grandmother borrowed $700 from her friend Cora. And
Miss Cora.
my question for you is, who has been the Cora in your life?
Ooh, his name's Jay.
Shout out to Jay.
Yeah. um, I was a lifestyle manager after I left the restaurant industry and pastry world completely. In New York, I was just over it. A few things have happened, and I was just like, I'm done. I have to do my own thing. I went and became a lifestyle manager. I met him through an app called TaskRabbit, and he needed me to do like little odds and ends around his home. And eventually, I was like, "Do you need an assistant?" He's like, "Yeah, I actually could use an assistant." So I worked for him for 2 to 3 years, and I made a lot of money because he would refer me to like all his friends. But during the holidays, I was still making blondies, and I just, I think I went to the dollar store and got some like those little tin canisters, and I put some blondies in there for him. I knew he didn't eat sweets, but I figured he can just try it and give it the out or whatever. And he tried it, and he said I took them to work, and everyone was saying it's the best thing they ever had. Like, what do you like? Either, excuse me, shit or get off the pot. Like, are you going to do this as a business, or are you going to continue doing this, what you're doing for me? Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. You can. I would just like. I'm just kind of soaking that in.
Yeah. He had become like a close friend, a mentor, someone who, still to this day, I think really believes in me and what I'm trying to do. And he kind of like mentored me in the sense of like, okay, I showed him my Instagram. He's like, you need to work on your photos. So I think a lot of people who are like, your photos are so great. I'm like, I always think of Jay because he's the one who told me like, work on your photos. And I don't think he even realized that like that was going to be like, I was going to become like this Instagram business, but it's just ironic that was the first piece of advice I got from someone about Blondery, and it's still to this day is like the number one thing people comment on. Besides, once they taste the product, then it's like about the product. But when they're first meeting me and they first see my booth or at a pop-up or my website or the Instagram, they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is so visually appealing."
I just love like it's always to have that person in your life that just kind of makes you. Yeah, like he said, shit or get off the pot. Like they challenge your idea of yourself and like what you're capable of. And most people think it's like, I mean, because you knew you were like, look, you have worked in pastry. I understand all the techniques. I've done the job. So you understood the vocation. But when for me, when I talk about what you could be and what you could do, it's kind of like that space of, can you be bigger? Like, can you really match your environment to what's happening with like your internal dialogue? It's like, hey, I want something more for myself. And when that something more presents itself to you, it's like, are you prepared to be fearless enough to do something about it? Even if you don't, it's like, even if I don't have a roadmap for it, I tell people like, specifically when you come from a community or a family of people who may not exactly have done what you did. They might have done something adjacent to it. They might have some really great ideas to contribute. But like, I remember like when Will Smith first got on Instagram and he was talking about, and people of course loved it, but one of the most like profound things that he posted was about how like nobody else is you. And nobody else can live your life and walk your path and live your journey. And so even if there's 100 people doing something similar, they can't do it the way you do it. And so it was that idea, like, do you believe in your own potential to be great? And so many people will say they really believe it until you offer them an opportunity to not prove that they can do it, but just prove that they believe it. And it's like, so when the universe goes, okay, well, I'm gonna give you an opportunity to prove your belief, and you just go, oh, okay. So it's like, to find that person who won't let you back out of that is such a blessing, and such like the scariest thought, like that they become so invaluable to you, because you're like, thank you for not letting me be scared of my own shadow.
So I mean, yeah, a shout out to Jay. Thank you, sir, for, making sure she did not hide her light under a bushel. Uh, so like now, and which is a great segue into the food. Like for me, I'm like, because I really desperately miss talking about food with food people. So, and you would think doing this podcast, I would do it more frequently, but I always want people to see a bit more about your life and not so much about like the product you sell or what you do. But there are moments where you kind of go, the food seems to be an expression of who you are. And, for me, like looking at the fact that you took 10 years to tweak the recipe for these blondies. So I'm like, help me understand, because 10 years is like, that's a long ass time. So, for anyone out here listening to this show right now and you have an idea and you think 10 months is sufficient, I would offer you an opportunity to take 10 years if it takes 10 years. Like for me, I think that is one of the boldest moves to make, is that you don't put it out into the world until you feel it's right. And I know, like, over 10 years, people probably like, well, go ahead and sell them. I mean, they're good enough right now. These are delicious. What are you talking about? Because I know that life. But I also know that you're in relationship with this food and with this idea, and you would not want to put this out in the world unless the relationship was right, unless you were in right relationship with the food. So talk to me about that 10 years. Like, where did you start? When did you stumble onto a favorite ingredient? When was your aha moment with the recipe?
Yeah, I think, I should have documented it a little better, right? So I definitely can't give you dates, but um, I believe that good food starts with great ingredients. So, like you said, my favorite ingredient, right? So, when I started pastry school, I interned in France for 3 months at Alain Ducasse's École Nationale Supérieure de la Pâtisserie. I think I'm totally butchering the name, but it was in the south of France, and I remember them taking so much care with, like the chefs would take so much care in the ingredients that we use. And I remember the butter being a huge thing that we talked about a lot. And we talked about, the ratios for American butter versus European butter in school, but when I got to France, I mean, everything is just better in France. So I brought that same philosophy to the blondies. So what are the best ingredients I can find to create this very kind of simple dessert or pastry? And I think it started with the butter. It started with me using only European butter in all my recipes. So like any recipe, anything I make is usually going to have European butter in it if it has butter in the recipe.
So, for the people who, of course, are a little green to the butter game, I am not
Yeah.
one of those people. But I'm happy for an educational moment, a moment to learn, a moment to grow.
Yeah.
Could you give us a quick tutorial about the difference between the best butter and everybody else's butter?
Okay, so butter is important in pastry, I would say, because mainly because of its melting point. So butter usually has a final melting point of 94 degrees, while shortening has around 110, which means that when it hits your tongue, it takes a shorter amount of time to melt. That's important because think about when you put, a buttercream that's made with real butter versus a buttercream made with shortening in your mouth. That waxy mouth feel is because it hasn't fully melted in your mouth yet. Um, so that's one. The other thing is that American butter, um, like by law, has to have a minimum of 80% milk fat. So those milk solids that are in butter, they have to have a minimum of 80% of the volume of the weight, while European butter has to have between 82 and 84. So that means that the fat that's in the butter is of a higher percentage. Therefore, you get more of that creamy flavor and texture. And more fat, obviously I just said means more creamier texture and more flavor, but it also creates kind of how do you describe it adds moistness, tenderness, flakiness, volume, and I think that's especially when you're doing something very simple. I think when you're working with a very simple recipe such as a brownie or a blondie, that becomes kind of your main ingredient.
That for me, I mean, to center butter in a recipe. Come on,
Yeah.
ma'am. Come on.
Don't ask me how many calories are in one.
It
of
doesn't
my
does it
blondies.
matter though, y'all? Come on. Like if you're eating food and just evaluating it on that level, you don't deserve what she's serving you. You just don't. Just put it back. You don't know what you're doing.
Can I say something about that? What you just said? I think like it's important to note what she just said, because I think a lot of people approach my blondies as if there's something that's at like Safeway or Key Food, like those blondies they have in those like plastic containers, and they're like, this is overpriced for this, and it's not majority of people, but some do purchase it. I think thinking that I'm trying to compete with a grocery store, and I just want to be very clear that I'm not at all. This is we're different, but it's different if you don't appreciate good food, or appreciate the time also that it takes to make good food, then I may not be for you. And I'm at that stage where I just need to start saying that more.
I think at some point it's just, wow. I just am like, that's just exasperating. I think one of the conversations, and this is just a brief sidebar, one of the conversations that we are not having about this culinary industry revolution, as I'm just going to call it a renaissance. Hopefully we're at the beginning of a renaissance. And the thing we're not talking about is your point about labor and the value of that labor. And I remember like when I first started to make eating out with me very unpleasant for other people, which I still don't care about because I like to eat alone. And we would go to places and someone would open the menu and they would look at they have a side, and it would either be like a mashed potato or a fry or something like that, because that's how it's printed on the menu. And they would go, oh my God, why are you charging me $11 for some fries? And I immediately would almost fly across the table, because as a chef and as a cook, I understood that when I worked in New York at my first job, I had to hand cut potatoes for 500 orders. I had to poach them in duck fat, which means I had to melt the duck fat first in the oven at 200 degrees for 2.5 hours and infuse it with garlic and rosemary and then put the fries in. And then I had to pull them all out in batches, lay them on sheet trays, and put them in the walk-in to cool down. And that was the day before they were supposed to be served. And then when it was time, I had to batch them out for 500 orders. So when you are whining about the cost of your food, trust me when I tell you, you are not being charged enough.
Right. We don't pay enough for food in America.
We really don't. And I'm like, if we don't get honest about that one point, because people are picky about, well, we should be paying people more money and we should be paying restaurant workers more. But we need to explain to people why we are telling you that you need to pay restaurant workers more. And then you need to make that possible by charging people for what they're eating. I mean, that is not... I don't think people understand the labor that goes into it. I know they don't understand it. And part of the Disney magic that we provide to people in restaurants is not letting them see that labor, but it has now bit us in the ass. And people think that it's literally a kid ripping open a bag of fries and shoving them into a fryer. Mm-hmm. And that is not what is happening.
No, not at all.
At all. So okay, thank you, officer. So now that we've covered the butter, and I love the fact that butter is like a central component and that it's quality butter and it's European butter, because I always have European butter in the fridge. Mm-hmm. The signature blondie, the one that kind of told you that this is the one, this is the thing to start with, this is kind of the baseline? How did that recipe kind of come together?
So I think that it started with those pecan praline candies that the old ladies at my church would make, the elders, and I
Them
think
things are delicious, y'all. Those things are delicious. If you
they're
can find
so
you an old
good.
black lady at church,
Yes,
see if she
because
got them candies.
I don't think that people, like, when they're mass produced, they don't taste the same.
Because they don't care. They don't care about them. They don't care about the
Yeah,
nut they use. They don't care about the level, the how caramelized the sugar. They don't care. Go ahead. I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, no, I think like I remembered, I identified, I think at an early age that this was different. Like this candy was very different from other candies I've had, because whoever that lady was probably very. I only used Land O'Lakes butter, or like she was probably very intentional about her ingredients, and I was forever chasing that flavor memory. And even when I went to New Orleans, I was like, this doesn't taste the same. It still doesn't taste the same. And the pecan and salted caramel blondie is just kind of my nod to that lady introducing me to, care for ingredients.
Ooh, okay. So y'all, I mean, just thank you, because there's so much magic in that story. The first bit is like just like really good R&B singers come out of church choir.
Mm-hmm.
Really good ingredients and love of food comes out of black church ladies. So I'm just saying, y'all, if you want to really understand how to like really do something correctly with care and thought, then you want to find you an old black church lady. But I got really amped, and this is one of the reasons why I'm glad we don't do video just yet, because your point about chasing the taste memory, like that is my entire life. That is my philosophy around cooking food for other people, choosing restaurants, like that one thought drives pretty much everything about how I feel about food, is that I constantly creating a moment for someone to chase, and that involves such a level of like care and thoughtfulness. And it's the one thing that I've noticed, like looking at the reviews on your website, hearing other people talk about your food, following you on Instagram, and looking at other people with the feedback. It's obvious that there is a very particular level of like care and thought in what you do. And where I can hear you talk about, I can hear the example of thoughtfulness, especially when it comes to ingredients, but I'd love to hear you talk about like care. I think that's another component that's missing from the restaurant space right now. It's kind of just waxed and waned for a long time, and I think it is a result of like really toxic kitchen culture, is that you stop caring. And the challenge with that is if you're a real food person, when you sit down to a meal, you can taste it in the food. When it's missing, you are like, what the hell is this? And so it's almost offensive, because all the ingredients are there, the recipe's been executed perfectly, the plate looks beautiful, but the thing that's the most important, the thing that like feeds your soul, is missing. And it's kind of like the unspoken ingredient, the ingredient that's just not tangible. So talk to me about your approach to like when you're making a batch, and like what your thought process is about who you are and your customer and your product, and how that relationship works together.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it started with me not necessarily thinking about the customer, and I know that that's probably super crazy to say, but because I didn't think I was going to actually be selling these blondies. I just was trying to make it a really good blondie, so I could enjoy something, and my family could enjoy something. I forgot to mention that on the holidays, and my grandmother only closed the restaurant 2 days out of the year, and that was Thanksgiving and Christmas. So on Thanksgiving and Christmas, all of her children would come to her house, and it was their only day off. And apparently, my mom just told me this, apparently they would work from the restaurant, I think she said opened at 9 a.m. and would close at 5 a.m. And I was like, what? Like, no, she said they opened at 11 and they closed at 5 a.m. So, yeah, they were tired. So when we got together on these holidays, it was such a big thing. And my mom was in charge of making the desserts. So I've always made the desserts from the box, from my own recipes, after pastry school. That's always been my job. So when I was creating these blondies, I had my family more so in mind and also just my own taste buds. So when now, the evolution of me selling the product, I still take into account what my customer is looking for. So, such as it took me not 10 years, but it took me 2 years to develop the Brooklyn Blackout, which is gluten free. It happens to be gluten free. But you would never know it because I wanted it to be something that everyone could enjoy, regardless of if they're gluten free, they practice gluten free living or not. Um, the same with my vegan sweet potato blondie that we'll be releasing this fall is like it's taken me 3 years to develop this recipe because I really wanted something that everyone could enjoy regardless of their dietary restrictions or not. And I think that I'll probably continue to practice that. And I mean, I get inspired by things all the time. The birthday cake blondie was actually a mistake. I was making the Brooklyn Blackout and I didn't use the gluten-free flour. So I have like this really dark chocolate Oreo type base. And I'm like, ooh, let's make an Oreo blondie. And then I took it to a pop-up and people loved it. And now it's a core on the menu.
Wow. I
Yeah.
mean, that makes sense because people love an Oreo.
Yeah.
I was like, because people do love this Oreo situation. I love, it's incredible because and you definitely it makes absolute sense that the first person in the relationship you're not thinking about customers first because you're the person in relationship with that food first.
Yeah.
And so it makes absolute sense that we're again like it was the process of chasing this memory. Yeah. And like and trying to recreate the moment that was created when you had those salted pecans the first time.
Yeah.
And so I think people don't fail to understand that like a lot of times when someone is in the kitchen creating something for the first time or trying to recreate something for the again is that's what usually drives all of us, is that we're trying to pull on a memory. We're trying to pull on the voices that kind of steer our compass, our internal compass a little bit. And so like for me, I'm like, when I'm cooking, it's like I'm thinking about my grandmothers, I'm thinking about my mom, I'm thinking about like all what I mean, you think about all the people who have influenced the taste that you love and the things that make you feel at home and that make you feel like yourself, that ground you. Speaking about holidays, because I had a opportunity to do a couple of profiles on a few women who are from indigenous communities, and we talked about, for lack of a better term, decolonizing Thanksgiving. And for me, it was a really interesting question, or it was a really interesting inquiry to kind of consider like what holidays look like specifically after kind of these social uprisings and like these internal uprisings for a lot of people. And so since we are coming into holiday space and we are quickly approaching September, and essentially I think a lot of these holidays will sneak up on people, and being a person who obviously is a retailer and a baker, and you have a commercial business and you have to sell product for yourself, like how are you viewing these holidays kind of in light of what's happening within like Black America, as well as within like indigenous communities, and like what's your lens like right now when it comes to these things?
Yeah. I mean, one, my heart goes out to everyone, all of us who have suffered the hands of white privilege and all of the crazy things that we've experienced as Black and brown and indigenous people. I think for me, like I said, holidays have never been about, oh, it's Thanksgiving. It's like, these are the only 2 days my grandmother let us have off. So this is the only time we get to be together. So it's always been just about family. It's never really been about, let's celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas. It's never been about that.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
so I think that for me, like that's how I view it, is that it happens to be Thanksgiving, but that's not really it. It's that we're all together and we're not in the restaurant working.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it's a day off from labor
Yeah.
from laboring together for sure. Because I know like Thanksgiving. And speaking to all of the women that I did those profiles on, like everyone had a really common experience to that. They were like, well, our family never really paid attention to like the holiday in and of itself, but it was the one day in the year, or the few days in the year that everyone was available
Right.
to be together, and so we just took advantage of that time. So
Yeah.
now for your family, are you still the person who brings all the baked goods?
I'm not, because I'm not out there. But that's
Oh,
why Blondery was started, though, because I was here and they were like, where are the blondies? We need the blondies. We're having Thanksgiving dinner. You're not here. You're in New York. So I started shipping them. I opened up a website just for them, and they ended up telling all their friends and family. And I sold over 500 orders in a 2-week time frame.
you know what? They're forever the entrepreneurs. They were like, you know what? Go
She got a
ahead and just.
website.
She got a website. Yo, go ahead and hit her up. You're like, y'all, that was not for everybody, okay?
Yeah.
That was not
Yeah.
for everyone. But I'm not
Yeah.
mad at these coins. Thank you very much. Um,
Exactly.
do you have any recipes that are directly inspired by your family?
Um, I would say the blondies, the pecan and salty caramel for sure. And I don't sell this, but my German chocolate cake is inspired by my dad. That's his favorite cake. I have to make it for him every year. And then I have a white cake with fresh strawberries and whipped cream that's inspired by my best friend, because she doesn't eat cake, but she'll eat a strawberry shortcake. And I'm like, that's still a cake, but okay. Um,
I'm sorry.
yeah, and those are two things I don't really sell, but those are, I would say, the three recipes that I have. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, my biscuits. I make a
I'm
really
sorry, you said
good.
biscuits?
Yes.
Okay. I was like, I don't know how you thought you was gonna slide that by, but well, let's talk about these biscuits. Do you sell these biscuits? Are these biscuits
So
for
that's
friends only?
funny. That's funny. I actually, when I opened my website, I started with selling the frozen biscuits that you could bake at home and the blondies. And I just didn't have enough experience shipping perishable goods to sustain that. But look out, 2021, they're coming back, I think.
I mean, look, y'all, 2020 was garbage and trash, and we are only hopeful that 2021 is going to give us the goods. And if we can get these biscuits, like, we already in a good place. Mama, just thank you in advance. Let me know when those show up. I'd like to pre-order. I'm not going to get played on these. I'm not going to get played on these biscuits. So for right now, of course, outside of your work, what are you doing to, like, keep joy in your life? And are you pursuing any new interest? I'm always one of those people, like, to be a creative person, I'm always pursuing, like, my curiosities. And so are there any new skills you're wanting to learn, or anything that has kind of piqued your interest that you're kind of chasing down?
Yeah. That's interesting that you asked me that today, because I am pursuing a few things. So one is I've been really looking into surrealism. So kind of like the bridge between our subconscious and conscious mind. Um, there's a lot of art around surrealism that I find, like, I'm super attracted to it for some reason. So I've been doing a lot of research on that. I have no idea how it will play into Blondery. They're like, oh yeah, put a blondie on top of someone's head and take a picture of it. I'm like,
Girl,
no, that's not
some
really what I want to
things.
do.
I was just
Just
saying, some
interested
things
in
are
it.
just for your own, like the nourishment of your own soul. I mean,
Yeah.
there's because I talk about this frequently, like with my own little tribe of people, about how, because again, we are really kind of conditioned to think of ourselves as like kind of just a single dimension, and the idea of pursuing other interests outside of our vocations aren't always encouraged. They're like, well, why are you interested in that? I mean, aren't you doing this? And I'm like, that's my vocation. That's what I do for work. That's my labor for in exchange for value. Like that's just one part of my life. And I have lots of other interests and other things that like pique my curiosity. And do I not have a right to pursue that? I'm like, are you crazy? It gives me a full life. What's wrong with you? Have you found any like surrealist paintings that specifically kind of just that you keep coming back to?
Yeah, Salvador Dali is like, I mean, obviously he's like the what is he like he's the one you would look to for any type of surrealism. But I really like what's the name of the piece? I think it has like a house on top of these elephants that have really skinny legs, and there's like a stallion, and then there's a guy holding a cross, and it's like it's just such an interesting piece to look at because I find something new in it every time. But all of his work I really enjoy.
I love it. Yeah, before I became a chef, I was an art student.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it doesn't go. I was like, that stuff just doesn't go away. You don't. It's not. It's like breaking up with somebody and you're like, I don't love them anymore. I'm like, that's a lie. Yeah. You love them in a different way now. That's all that is. You have reassigned their position in your life, but that love doesn't die. It just reasserts itself. So yeah. So like my passion for art. Like I absolutely love fine art so deeply, and I find like it has such a job in the world to help communicate certain things that you can't write or say. And so yeah, I just find it's important for me to like for specifically for Black people to like really kind of try to find an artist to connect to, because there's always going to be something that you cannot articulate, and typically you will find a piece of art that can articulate that for you. So my favorite surrealist painting is Magritte. He's the one with the guy with the bowler hat and the apple.
Oh yes,
yeah. And for me, like a lot of his stuff seems super modern, like the way illustrators do their work now. And when you see an expression of art at this point being done on a computer, a lot of times it's there's a sense of like canvases and oil paints and things like that give you, because they were alive at some point, they came from something that was living, you get a sense of that from the painting. And when you and I understood this because I was a graphic designer, and so like I understood that the difference between creating something on canvas or with like chalk or charcoal, you're using a tree that was burned, you're using canvas that was cotton at some point, so all these were living things. So when you create something on a computer, you don't have that same relationship because it wasn't a living thing before. It was you have this, it's mechanical, and so the energy of the art comes off as a bit mechanical. So when I look at Magritte's work, there's this interesting sense like he could have created a lot of his work on a computer and given you the same vibes. So I don't know, I think he just was like this guy who really definitely thought ahead of his time. But I'm looking at, like, I just had to Google really quick, The Lovers by Magritte is interesting. That their sheets or the fabric prevents them from kissing, or like, it's so interesting. It's so interesting. It's great. And I was those people like, like you could get in. And for me, I'm like, I'm looking forward to like getting to a place where Black people think of themselves as not a monolith. And they feel like, we can have these discussions. We can go into, a 30-minute discussion about a piece of art and really have something to say and not feel like it's out of place. For us to have those kind of conversations, because I still feel like we, you don't feel welcome to even have the discussion a lot of times. And it's like, well, until we kind of push our way into that and just actually have those conversations amongst yourselves. You don't have to like try to find a white person to have that conversation with. Find a fellow art lover in the Black community and talk on. So for you know, because I saw that you're on a break at this point, and I'm guessing probably, you know, hopefully a mental break as well.
Yeah.
What do you do for self-care? And, you know, because I know like the wellness conversation is rife with such commercialism, but for legit genuine self-care, like what do you do for yourself, and how do you protect your own internal space?
The other thing I'm pursuing is love, so I'm dating.
You better go ahead.
Yeah, and I think like just dating in general has been such an eye-opening experience to where I need to heal. Um, and you know, attachment styles, attachment theory has been like heavy on my brain, and what I've been thinking about lately. But a lot of my self care comes from like just going with those like weird and crazy ideas I have. So like tonight, I'm like, I'm gonna go and find a beach and like break into it and just watch the sunrise. Like that's what I'm
Ooh,
gonna do for my
just
form
don't
of self care.
that. Let me look now. I'm just, yeah, I'm not gonna be that person. Be like, so where are you going?
I
And
don't know yet. I can't tell
like,
you.
just let me know. I won't go the same time you're going, but just let me know how it goes so I can go later.
Right.
I love that. It's that I think people, you know, because like that wellness and self care conversation became so commercialized, people think it's like lighting a few candles and
I mean, I
listening
do
to
that
some.
too.
I
But
mean, you know, you know, it can be mixed in there too. But that I think that intentional idea of the act of going to the beach and like actually intentionally thinking about the time that you're going to be there and what you want to see when you get there, and like I think all of those things, self-care is more nuanced and layered than most people give it credit for. And I think that's the thing. It's just that the decision to do something like that actionable, is really powerful. And
because I'm
your brain,
pursuing love, like, and I'm pursuing
right?
love on like so many levels, like with another person, with myself, with my company. Like this time, I just turned 30. Is I feel like for me about pursuing love.
Okay, so y'all, that was, go ahead and write that down and stick that on a post-it on your mirror or something. The
It's
idea,
a form of self care.
it really is, to pursue love is a form of self-care. Like that's gonna be that nugget. Because I was just having a conversation about love, and like it was with like my brother's fiance, and we were talking about a couple of things that she had mentioned, like, you know, me when I started dating your brother, you know, I considered us not necessarily to just be like, you know, like dating or in love, but we were like purpose partners, like together. Our
Mm-hmm.
relationship has a purpose, you know, that's different than when we're apart or when we're single. And I was like really thinking about that, and I was like, you know what, but could it be that it's a lot less complicated than we have to be in relationship with each other to do something? I think the goal for us as humans is to be in a relationship to learn how to love and be loved. And
Right.
if that is all you do, that is so rich, and that's such a huge task. I mean, I was like, is there a bigger task than that? Is there a bigger purpose in life than to learn how to love other people, love yourself, and then receive love in return? That's the work. And so when people are like, well, you know, we want to get together and be in this relationship, we want to build a business and we want to build a life and we want to have this, and I'm like, okay, that's great. And a lot of those behaviors are a result of being in a partnership. But like, to be together with another human being, intentionally learning how to love each other, learning how to love yourselves individually, and then learning how to receive love, I'm like, that in itself is a life's work. It's a life's
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
So like, girl, thank you. And love on, because come on, like, it's not, you know, it's not passive. I was people like, love is
No, it's
so not
not.
passive. I did like, you know, I did want to like circle back to the point about you loving your work, and like help me understand like what that looks like, and how you're pursuing love for love for your work again.
I think it's about me taking the time to remember my time, you know, in kitchens and what was lacking and what was there that was constructive, and trying to build all those things into Blondery, and we're moving into a bigger space this fall, and I'm so thankful, but I'm also just like nervous because now I'm gonna hire people, and I'm like, who do I need to be in order to get these people to their full potential in life? Because I was just talking to Portia Wilson. She does a lot of food writing, and I was telling her, like, if we're not being nourished in our work environments, then what's the point of work? Like, I've never stuck around in a place that I wasn't being poured into. So how do I fill myself up during this time so that I can pour into others come October 1st and ensure that they are going out and becoming and being their best selves in the world?
Y'all, that's a whole word about leadership. I'm gonna let y'all just go ahead and pull that out and marinate on that for a minute. Because if you're not in pursuit of being a leader, if that's not something that interests you, like you don't want to manage people, you don't want to be the boss, that kind of person, you are within your rights to consider the fact that if you are being led, you deserve to be cared for in that way. You deserve to be in a space that you are nourished by your work. And yeah, thank you. That's one of them, like, feed your soul kind of thoughts. Like, your work you should be nourished by your work. Yeah. And yes, Portia is one of my favorite people. Yes. She will always be a fan. Yeah. So these last few moments, I want to make sure I heard, we're moving to a new space. Are we launching new product in October? Are we just
lots of new products, like a new category, like not blondies.
Shoot. Okay. I'm not going to ask you to spill no tea if you don't want to.
November 1st.
Okay, y'all. So November 1st, we all just want to keep our eyes on the website. So let us know, like, where we can find you, how we can follow your progress, and like where we can. I mean, I know most people like. I've become that sign up for the newsletter type of person because it's like all the information you want is there. So just give us like website addresses and like social media stuff and all that business.
Yeah, you can find me at Blondery on Instagram. So that's B as in boy, LONDERY. And then it's the same, blondery.com for the website. On either of those places, you can find and sign up for our wait list. It's going to be a crazy holiday season, so I definitely suggest you get on the wait list because I can't promise I'm going to be able to fulfill, last-minute orders.
And as far as employer type stuff, are you looking for employees just like privately in your own way at your own pace? Is there a way for someone to like apply or shoot their shot?
Yes, for sure. I would love, I feel like I should come out with a campaign that's like, if you've been mistreated in the restaurant industry as a Black and person of color, come to death row. Like, that's kind of like the feel I wanted to have.
Yes. Please do that. I need someone to be dressed up as like Suge Knight.
Yes.
And do all of that.
Because that's the vibe. Like, I'm just like, if you're ready to like change your life, probably work the hardest you've ever had in your life, but be super fulfilled, because I want people to have the same experience I'm having with Blondery with my company. So if you want to own your own bakery, if you want to, invest in something that's growing and moving, then definitely send me a DM, send me an email, and we'll talk. And I'm a big proponent for, I don't want you to stay in the kitchen unless that's something that you really want to do. But you should be moving up. You should be progressing. So if you want to be purchasing manager or you want to work on the marketing with me, I'm open to it. So. Yeah.
All right, y'all. She trying to be out here and be somebody else's J, y'all. Like,
yes.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining me and for spending some time and chatting. I absolutely, again, like, my soul is definitely enriched and nourished, and it always is after a conversation with one of these with all the ladies, because wow. So yeah, I will, look, November 1st, I'm going to put my name on that waiting list. And then when the biscuit list go up, I'm going
Oh,
on that one too. So yeah, so thank you again.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. I appreciate your time, and what you're doing is amazing. We talked about that offline, but I want to say it publicly that the work that you're doing is not going unnoticed. I've seen your name pop up on a lot of different things this week. Actually, Portia mentioned it, I think, on live. I saw it in a newsletter somewhere. I've seen your name a lot, so keep doing what you're doing.
That is all for this week's episode. Thank you to our guests for spending some time with us, and thank you for listening in and for being a part of the Flyest Click in podcasting. If you love these conversations, be sure to download, subscribe, comment, and share. You can get further connected with the Afros and Knives community by following us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget to visit our website, afrosandknives.com, and sign up for our newsletter. Afros and Knives does this work only with the financial support of our Patreon community. To become a patron, please visit patreon.com/afrosandknives and pledge your monthly support. We are working on expanding into video as well as offering patron-only content this year, and you don't want to miss out. Until next week, may you be happy, may you be safe, may you be healthy, may you be at peace.